All right, strap in, everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into Plutarch's lives.
But not in the way you might think.
Yeah, we're not just going to sit here and, recite names and dates.
Think of it more like we're stepping into this ancient hall of fame.
Right.
Yeah.
With some pretty strong personalities alongside us for the ride.
Yeah, definitely strong personalities.
Okay, so who do we have joining us?
Well, we've got Socrates, of course, questioning what greatness even means.
Yeah, he'd be all over that.
Joe Rogan, ready to break down all the gladiator-level drama.
Oh, he'd love that, for sure.
Kanye, convinced he could outshine everyone.
Naturally.
And Nietzsche.
Happy boy. Being Nietzsche.
Always going to have Nietzsche in the mix.
Of course.
All right, so what's the big question we're tackling here?
Well, we're trying to figure out if these parallel biographies Plutarch gives us, are they actually lessons in virtue?
Right, because he's comparing these figures, right?
Exactly.
So is he saying like, hey, learn from these great people? Or is it more like ancient hype, like PR for these guys to get more clout?
Ooh, ancient clout chasing.
Exactly.
That's a great way to put it.
So are you ready to dive into this stack of lives with me?
Let's do it.
Okay, so first things first, how does Plutarch even approach these biographies?
Yeah, because it's not just a straight-up history book, right?
Not at all. He loves to compare and contrast his subjects.
Right, like he pairs up a Greek and a Roman and then kind of puts their lives side by side.
Exactly. He's highlighting both, their good qualities and their flaws.
It's like he's setting up a historical boxing match.
And he's really interested in their character.
More than just getting the facts straight, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's not always 100% accurate historically.
But he's trying to get at something deeper.
He wants to make you think, to actually feel something for these figures, even if it means maybe exaggerating a little bit for drama.
I can already hear Rogan getting excited.
Oh, absolutely. He'd be loving all the drama.
So it's more like historical fiction, but based on real people.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
All right, well, let's jump into it then. Who are our first contenders?
Well, we're starting off strong with Theseus and Romulus.
The legendary founders of Athens and Rome.
Talk about a power duo.
Talk about a power duo. Plutarch compares their ambition, their use of violence, even their relationships with women.
Yeah, he really gets into it.
I bet Rogan would be calling them the ultimate alpha males.
For sure. He'd be all about that alpha energy.
While Socrates is over there like, hold on a second, were their actions truly virtuous?
Exactly. Because Theseus was known for his cunning, right?
Yeah, remember the story of the Minotaur and the labyrinth?
Oh, yeah. Class.
He totally outsmarted that monster.
Brilliant strategist.
But he also wasn't exactly known for respecting the women from other cities.
Right, there's that.
Let's just say that.
And then you've got Romulus, who basically kidnapped a bunch of Sabine women to populate Rome.
Effective? Maybe. But definitely not ethical.
Raises a lot of questions, yeah.
I can just imagine the debate.
Yeah, Rogan would be focusing on the strategy of it all.
And Socrates would be over there giving a whole lecture on morality.
It's interesting how Plutarch presents these really complex figures, but doesn't shy away from their flaws.
He doesn't try to sugarcoat anything.
Not at all. He's showing us that greatness isn't simple.
Right.
It's messy, a mix of ambition, talent, and sometimes, yeah, some questionable choices.
It makes you think about how we judge historical figures today, doesn't it?
It really does.
Okay, so moving on. Who's next in our ancient Hall of Fame?
Let's talk about Lycurgus and Numa, the lawgivers of Sparta and Rome.
Lawgivers. Interesting.
Yeah, so this is where we see two very different visions of society take shape.
Okay, break it down for me.
So, Lycurgus, totally obsessed with military discipline.
Makes sense, he's Spartan.
Exactly. He shaped Sparta into a warrior society.
All about austerity and self-denial.
No luxuries allowed.
I can already see Kanye nodding along with that.
Right. Strength, order, those are things he seems to admire.
But wouldn't Nietzsche push back on that a little?
Oh, absolutely. He'd be questioning that whole system.
Too much blind obedience, not enough individual expression.
Exactly. He'd be advocating for, pushing back against that kind of conformity.
He'd probably call them mindless drones.
Yeah, I wouldn't be a fan.
And then on the other side, you've got Numa, who focused on religion and ritual as the foundation for a strong society.
Such a contrast to Lycurgus's military focus, right?
Totally different approaches.
It's like Plutarch is asking, are there multiple paths to creating a successful society?
Even if those paths seem totally contradictory.
Right, because you've got the Spartan way focused on strength and discipline.
And the Roman way, with Numa emphasizing religion and tradition.
It makes you wonder what he's trying to say.
Maybe it's about finding a balance.
Maybe, or maybe he's just presenting the different options.
I wonder what our modern-day commentators would say.
Oh, I'm sure they'd have plenty to say.
Rogan might be drawn to that practicality of Sparta.
Yeah, the discipline, the focus.
Kanye,
Yeah.
I bet he'd be all about the aesthetics of the Roman rituals.
The symbolism, the grandeur.
And Socrates.
He'd be dissecting the core values of each society, trying to figure out what's truly just.
And what's truly right.
Always the philosopher, right?
Always.
Okay, let's move on to another fascinating pair.
Who do we have next?
Alcibiades and Coriolanus. Both brilliant military leaders,
The military leaders, okay.
but ultimately undone by their own flaws.
What kind of flaws?
Well, they both had immense talent, but they couldn't compromise.
They were too stubborn.
Yeah, they couldn't play the political game, you know. Their pride and their inability to adapt ultimately led to their downfall.
It's almost like Plutarch is giving us a warning.
Yeah, like watch out for that ego.
It can be your downfall.
Exactly.
But even so, I can kind of see Kanye relating to that unwavering self-belief.
Oh, definitely. That whole too genius to be understood thing.
Kanye's all about that.
But you know who wouldn't be on board with that?
Who?
Socrates and Nietzsche. That'd be emphasizing the importance of humility.
And self-awareness.
They'd argue that true greatness comes from being able to control your ego.
And working within the system even when it's frustrating.
It's not just about talent, it's about character.
It's about how you use that talent.
Exactly.
It's so interesting how different personalities would view these figures.
It is. They see themselves in both the triumphs and the flaws.
It's what makes Plutarch so fascinating.
He's not just talking about the past.
He's talking about human nature.
Those timeless struggles with ambition, pride, and the desire for legacy.
Speaking of which, we can't talk about Plutarch without mentioning Alexander the Great.
Oh, the conqueror of the world.
Kanye is probably already claiming he'd be even greater.
Oh, I'm sure he's already planning his bigger empire.
Bigger, bolder, more Kanye.
Definitely more Kanye.
But I think Socrates and Nietzsche would have some thoughts about that.
They'd be bringing up the cost of all that ambition.
The lives lost, the empires destroyed.
They'd make us question what greatness really means.
Is it all about conquest and power?
Is that all there is to it?
Plutarch definitely leaves us with a lot to think about.
He does.
It's like he's asking, what is the true measure of a life?
That's a great question.
And to make things even more complicated, we also have to talk about Caesar.
Ah, yes. Caesar, another giant of history.
His rise to power, his assassination, it's all so dramatic.
Like something straight out of a movie.
I bet Rogan would be loving it.
Oh, he'd be analyzing every political move, every betrayal,
He'd be drawing diagrams of the whole power structure,
trying to figure out who was playing who.
while Socrates is over there pondering whether Caesar was a force for good or for evil.
Did his ambition ultimately help Rome, or did it hurt it?
Tough question.
And what about Nietzsche? Where do you think he'd stand on Caesar?
I think he might be fascinated by Caesar's will to power.
That ability to bend the world to his vision
He might even admire Caesar's flaws.
is a sign of his humanity.
Yeah, that refusal to be bound by conventional morality.
It's incredible how these figures from thousands of years ago still feel so relevant today.
Plutarch's Lives is more than just a history book. It's a study of human nature.
In all its complexity,
It's like he's holding up a mirror to our own desires and dilemmas.
making us question what we value, what we'd fight for, what kind of legacy we want to leave behind.
And that's just the beginning, folks.
We're just getting started. And it's fascinating how Plutarch reveals those complexities, you know, not just through the big actions, but also through these small telling details.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like when he talks about Lycurgus and how he believed houses should be built using only axes and saws.
Right. No fancy tools allowed.
It was all about functionality and simplicity.
Rejecting those unnecessary embellishments.
He was basically shaping the Spartan mindset through architecture.
Exactly. Every detail was meant to reinforce those core values.
Discipline, austerity, no frills.
Exactly.
But speaking of shaping the Spartan mindset, didn't Plutarch tell a story about how Lycurgus ensured his laws would outlive him?
He did. It's a pretty wild story.
Rummy, how did that go again?
So Lycurgus convinces the Spartans to swear this oath.
To uphold his laws.
Yeah, until he returns from this journey.
Okay, so far so good.
But here's the catch. He never comes back.
He just disappeared.
He exiled himself to make sure his system stayed in place.
Talk about commitment. I wonder what our modern crew would make of that.
Oh man, Rogan would probably be impressed by the sheer willpower.
Right, like that's some serious dedication.
Nietzsche, I think he'd see it as a clever manipulation of power.
Playing the long game.
And Socrates, oh, he'd be debating the ethics of it all.
Was it right to deceive the Spartans like that? Even if it was for their own good.
Exactly. Always the philosopher.
It's amazing how one story can spark so many different interpretations.
It really shows you how much our own perspectives shape the way we see history.
We all bring our own baggage to the table, right?
Totally.
It's like we're looking at the past through different colored lenses.
And it also reminds us that even figures like Kyrgyz, who are often simplified as symbols,
Right, like he's just known as Mr. Spartan Discipline.
Yeah, but they were complex individuals making tough choices.
They weren't just caricatures.
Oh, not at all.
Yeah.
And Plutarch captures that complexity.
Speaking of complexity, I'm kind of curious about Plutarch's portrayal of women.
Yeah, it's ancient Greece and Rome, so we're not exactly expecting a feminist utopia.
Right. But I'm wondering, are there any notable female figures in his lives?
It's true that women's roles were often limited in those societies.
Yeah, they weren't exactly leading armies or running for office.
But Plutarch does give us these glimpses of some pretty remarkable individuals.
Who wielded influence in different ways.
Exactly.
Okay, give me some examples.
Well, there's Theseus's mother, Aethra.
Okay, and what does she do?
She encourages him to claim his rightful place as heir to Athens,
So she's a strong, supportive figure.
guiding him towards his destiny.
Interesting. So even within the constraints of their society, women could still play a significant role.
Absolutely. And then you have Lucretia, whose story is really tragic.
What happened to her?
Well, it's a long story, but basically, her story becomes a catalyst for the overthrow of the Roman monarchy.
Whoa, that's a pretty big impact.
Plutarch presents her as a symbol of Roman virtue and the dangers of tyranny.
So even though their actions might have been confined to the domestic sphere, they could still have these huge consequences.
Exactly. Their actions could ripple out and change the course of history.
It's like they're operating behind the scenes, influencing events in these subtle but powerful ways.
And it challenges us to look beyond the traditional narratives.
Right, not just focus on the guys with all the swords and shields.
And recognize those often unsung contributions of women.
I like that, the unsung heroes of history.
Okay, shifting gears a bit.
Okay, where are we headed now?
I'm curious about the tough decisions Plutarch's heroes had to make.
Yeah, we've talked about their ambition and their flaws, but what about the challenges of leadership?
Oh, there are tons of examples of that. Take Solon, the Athenian lawgiver.
Solon, okay.
He faced this massive debt crisis in Athens.
Oh, wow, debt crisis, that's never good.
It was a situation that threatened to tear the city apart.
I can imagine people get pretty upset when they're in debt.
So he comes up with this radical solution.
Okay, what did he do?
It's called Sysakthia, which essentially means shaking off burdens. It involved canceling all debts, freeing those enslaved because of debt, and reforming the Constitution.
Whoa, that's a pretty bold move. I bet that didn't go over well with everyone.
It was definitely controversial. The wealthy weren't thrilled about having their debts canceled,
Yeah, I can imagine.
But Solon argued that it was necessary.
To prevent a revolution.
Exactly. He was trying to prevent a social revolution, address the inequality that was threatening Athenian society.
He's trying to find a balance.
Yeah, between the interests of the wealthy and the poor.
While also ensuring stability.
It's a timeless dilemma.
It really is. Leaders still grapple with those same issues today.
Absolutely. And Plutarch gives us a glimpse into how Solon navigated that challenge.
The compromises he made, the consequences that followed.
It's a reminder that leadership often involves making those difficult choices.
Balancing competing interests, anticipating the long-term impact.
It's not easy.
And it makes you wonder what Solon would make of our own economic and social challenges today.
Oh, he'd have a lot to say, I'm sure.
He probably wouldn't be impressed.
Probably not.
Okay, so who else faced those tough leadership challenges?
Well, we can't forget about Cato the Elder.
Ah, yes, the grumpy grandpa of Roman politics.
That's a great way to put it.
He was known for his frugality, right?
Oh, absolutely. Totally averse to luxury and extravagance.
Thought it was corrupting the Roman spirit.
Weakening their resolve.
He was all about hard work, simplicity, a return to those traditional values.
Oh, those good old days.
I can just picture him shaking his fist at the younger generation, complaining about their fancy gadgets.
Back in my day.
Exactly. I bet Rogan would appreciate his no-nonsense attitude.
And that emphasis on self-reliance?
They'd probably have a lot to talk about.
But I'm not so sure Kanye would be as big a fan.
He'd probably tell Cato to loosen up a bit.
Embrace the finer things in life.
Right. A little more bling wouldn't hurt.
Exactly. And Nietzsche, I think he might find Cato's rigidity amusing.
But ultimately limiting.
He'd argue that true strength comes from embracing all aspects of human experience.
Not just the practical and austere.
It's about finding that balance.
It's fascinating how each of our modern figures gives us a different lens through which to view Cato.
They highlight different aspects of his personality and philosophy.
Makes you think more deeply about his impact on Roman society.
And that's what's so great about Plutarch's lives.
It's not just about learning about these figures in isolation.
It's about seeing them through multiple perspectives.
Understanding their contradictions, recognizing their relevance to our own lives. It's like he's giving us a toolkit for navigating the complexities of human nature.
Both in ourselves and in others.
Exactly. And speaking of navigating complexity, one of the things Plutarch does so well is exploring those rivalries and conflicts.
Oh yeah, the drama.
The drama that shaped these ancient societies.
And there were some pretty intense ones.
Any particular rivalry that stands out to you?
Well, the story of Marius and Sulla is a classic.
Marius and Sulla, okay.
It's a perfect example of how ambition and power can turn former allies into bitter enemies.
And plunge Rome into civil war?
Exactly. It gets pretty messy.
I've heard a little about them. Weren't they both incredibly ambitious?
Oh, absolutely. Ruthless, too.
So how did they go from allies to enemies?
Well, it's a long and complicated story, but basically, they both started out as relatively ordinary men.
Okay, so they weren't born into power?
No, they rose through the ranks.
Which makes their story even more dramatic.
Right. It's like a classic underdog story, but with a dark twist.
So what happened? How did it all go wrong?
Their thirst for power transformed them.
They got corrupted by ambition.
Exactly. They were willing to do whatever it took to achieve their goals.
It's a cautionary tale.
It really is about the dangers of unchecked power.
And it's something that feels all too relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the way power dynamics play out in politics and business, even in our personal lives.
We see those same patterns repeating themselves.
Plutarch gives us this window into those timeless struggles.
Helping us understand human ambition.
And the dangers of letting power go to your head.
It's really amazing how Plutarch manages to weave all these complex stories together, you know?
Yeah.
Drawing these parallels between figures who were separated by time and culture.
He's great at that, finding those connections.
It really makes you think about the common threads that run through human history.
Those universal themes, you know? Ambition, virtue, the pursuit of legacy, it's all there.
Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive, I have to ask.
What is it?
What's your favorite Plutarch story? Out of all the incredible lives he chronicles, is there one that really stands out to you?
Ooh, that's a tough one. There's so many to choose from.
I know, right?
But I think I have to go with the tale of Alcibiades.
Alcibiades, okay, the Athenian general and politician.
Yeah.
He's a controversial figure, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Brilliant, but also known for his extravagant lifestyle and some questionable decisions.
Yeah, he was kind of a wild card.
So what is it about his story that grabs you?
Well, he had it all, you know? Charisma, intelligence, military talent.
He was like the total package.
Yeah, he really was. He could have been one of Athens' greatest leaders.
Down here.
But he wasn't. No, his ambition and his inability to control his impulses, they ultimately led to his downfall.
It's like a Greek tragedy playing out on the historical stage.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
All those twists and turns, the exploration of human flaws, I can see why you'd be drawn to that.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even the most gifted individuals can be undone by their own weaknesses.
Plutarch doesn't try to make his subjects perfect.
Not at all. He shows us both their triumphs and their failures.
It makes them feel more real, more relatable, even though they lived thousands of years ago.
And that's what makes lives so enduring, I think.
It's that human element.
Yeah, it's not just a dry historical account. It's an exploration of what it means to be human.
To strive for greatness, to grapple with ambition, and the desire to leave a mark on the world.
And it makes you wonder, what would Plutarch make of our world today?
Right. With our obsession with celebrity and social media and all that.
Yeah, I bet he'd have a field day comparing the lives of, say, a reality TV star and a Nobel Prize-winning scientist.
He'd be dissecting their motivations, their values, their impact on society.
Trying to figure out what really matters.
He'd probably point out how fleeting fame can be.
How true greatness lies in those enduring contributions, not just momentary notoriety.
He might even challenge us to rethink our definition of success.
To look beyond the superficial.
Focus on those qualities that really matter.
Integrity, compassion, intellectual curiosity, you know, a commitment to making the world a better place.
And that's the real power of Plutarch's lives.
It's not just about learning about the past.
It's about using those stories to reflect on our own lives.
Asking ourselves, what kind of legacy do we want to build?
It's about finding inspiration in the stories of those who came before us.
Learning from their mistakes.
And forging our own paths to a life well lived.
So, to our listeners, I encourage you to explore Plutarch's lives for yourselves.
Yeah, dive in.
Discover the stories that resonate with you. Find those figures who inspire you.
Let their journeys guide you.
As you navigate the complexities of your own lives.
Well, that's all the time we have for today.
Yeah, sadly.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Plutarch's lives.
We had a great time.
We hope you've gained some new insights into these fascinating figures.
And those timeless lessons they offer.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning.
And keep seeking wisdom in the stories of those who came before us.
And who knows, maybe we'll even see you in the Ancient Hall of Fame someday.
Maybe, you never know.